Hey, Tyler, what's on your mind?
A lot of things, but I'll centralize it to one question. So this isn't about grief or trauma that's already happened. It's about something that may happen. So my wife and I, we have 3 parents that are in their mid-70s. How do we prepare for that? Because they all have health issues. So we want to be proactive rather than reactive.
Shall I?
Yes. Yes, please.
I'm a big fan of open communication, and I don't know how your parents are. I know that sometimes there's this generational thing where people are really uncomfortable talking about end-of-life stuff, but I find that talking about it, it's like the elephant in the room, right? I mean, we all have to face it at some point, and we think that talking about it actually makes our lives dark or unpleasant, but actually in sociological research, what we found was that people who are willing to confront difficult issues like this actually find more meaning in their lives, and they have more perspective, and they love people and use things love people and use things less, right? And so this idea of confronting hard subjects and having really vulnerable and open conversations about end of life is really important. So I would invite you to very gently and tenderly ask them, how do you feel about a conversation about this? And then start preparing yourself for the inevitable, which is grief. I mean, I think that the way that I look at grief, it's not just this single monolithic emotional structure. It's like an umbrella and underneath the umbrella, there are so many emotions with grief. There's sadness and sorrow and despair and anguish and sometimes anger and rage, confusion, envy. I mean, there are so many, but also curiosity and connection and openness. And so I think I would sort of try to learn as much as you can while inviting them to a conversation. Is that helpful?
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Tyler.
Yeah, that's great advice. Yeah, you can clap for that.
A few years ago, I got really, really sick, and I had to start talking to my wife about, hey, what if I'm not here? And I found it to be an incredibly freeing communication. And it's upsetting, and there was some grieving that went on there, like just as you see there, you're sort of grieving the hypothetical in a way. And you say you're preparing for something that might happen. Well, it's certainly going to happen to all of us, right? And yet, I found in our culture, specifically, we are scared to death to talk about death.
Yeah. We're even more scared to talk about grief.
Oh. Why is that?
Hard emotions.
Yeah.
I mean, it just brings up tears. I mean, there are death cafes, they're called death cafes, and those are popping up all over the place, where people are talking about end-of-life issues for themselves and preparing, doing their advanced directives. But, grief, I don't get invited to parties very often, just so you know. This is like as close to a party as I've been in 20 years, y'all. Hi! Woo! I gotta tell you a funny story. I teach a traumatic death class at ASU, and I walked into the class once, and I'm unpacking my things. It was the first day of class, and I heard these students in the front going, "Is that her?" And the other one's going, "I don't know. She seems awfully happy." They expected like the Grim Reaper to come in,
Well, I think that's what's fascinating about that is we confuse someone who is truly joyous. Joy makes room for other emotions, such as grief or sadness. They can hold things simultaneously. It's different from pleasure in that way. You can't be experiencing ecstatic pleasure and also grief at the same time. And so what do? We try to avoid grief by constantly consuming things that bring us momentary ecstatic pleasure.
Right. And see, here's the problem. This is my theory about that. My theory is that we don't know how to feel all of our emotions and fully inhabit our emotions. And so we fill our lives with things instead of really connecting with our true self. But if we can learn how to reclaim all of our emotions, which are some of the hard emotions, then we don't need that shit, right? Then because we are who we are, right?
Yeah.
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 Yeah, it's interesting because it is possible to, like, I have been sad before, but able to still experience joy. And the way that I got there, and it was the first time ever happened. It was earlier this year, actually. I was on a camping trip, and I was talking to someone about my mom and dad issues, and like just kind of laying it all out there with a friend. And I started to like tear up and get really sad about, the relationship I wish I had. And I just had this like feeling just rush over me where I was like, you know what, man? Like, I really like who I am as a person, so that's huge. Like, if you can really look in the mirror and love who you see. But the other thing is, I felt really lucky to like even have the experience to feel sadness, to have that opportunity to feel the emotion. Like that's a gift. I mean, I forget what the odds are of like a human being being born, but it's like astronomical. Like we're lucky to be able to have these emotions. And yeah, talking about them more, I think, helps us sift through them a little bit more. I'll tell you the one thing about your parents. No matter if it's your parents, romantic partner, friend, coworker, if you start these tough conversations and you lead with compassion, and that's your context for the conversation, those conversations will always go as well as they can go. I mean, they're still not easy conversations to have. But sometimes we get these negative emotions, and then we start to project kind of the negative feelings, and that's where it can really kind of go wrong. But I would just encourage you, approach it with compassion, and like I'm sure your parents will be open to it.
Did you enjoy this standalone Patreon highlight? If so, you can listen to full episodes of the Minimalist Private Podcast, available exclusively on Patreon. Visit patreon.com/theminimalists or click the link in the description. Your support keeps our podcast and YouTube channel 100% advertisement free.